Michael Halpin, thanks so much for coming back on to Talk Beliefs all the way from Nova Scotia, Canada. You are an assistant professor in sociology and social anthropology at Dalhousie University, Canada, and are currently studying the experiences of socially isolated men. You've published papers on involuntary celibates, or incels, a growing and occasionally deadly phenomenon that we are going to continue discussing today. So how have you been doing, Mike? I got quite a few emails after our last interview, and I believe you had your own share of interesting feedback.
Yeah, I did. It's not atypical for me to get a little bit of hate mail after after I do some talks on incels, and that was also the case after our interview. One of the things that got sent to me, it's a kind of interesting comparison that someone made between the acts of violence that incels commit and just regular anger. So I'll just share that to you. So a quote from this email: the act of shooting up a sorority house or a crowd of people to an incel is not really to accomplish anything, as it has more to do with something like being in your room and punching the wall without having to deal with the consequences, like angry parents are fixing the hole. So little sample of the type of correspondence that I get sometimes when I do these media engagements, and one once I got following our chat.
Mike, you and your colleagues have analyzed tens of thousands of comments on a popular incel forum site to better understand this community. Before we dive back into the world of incels, let's just have a little recap. Mike, what exactly is an incel?
In the kind of simplest way, incel stands for involuntarily celibate. So these are people who would like to have sexual or romantic relationships, but feel for some reason or another they're unable to have one. The concept with the term was initially coined by a woman in Canada. She started a blog that kind of focused on the experiences of people who had this type of like love shyness. And her blog was pretty open, had a discussion for a lot of people as an open, inclusive community. And it was for people who felt maybe unattractive, people who were shy, people who, for whatever reason, had trouble forming romantic relationships. As time has kind of gone on, the meaning of incel has been a little bit, I would say, distorted or appropriated. So by and large now, it's associated with heterosexual men who feel that they're unable to have sexual or romantic relationships. They particularly focus on the sexual relationships, but feel unable to have sexual and romantic relationships. And they're angry and upset about this. So they feel wronged or aggrieved or kind of left out or left behind from society because they're unable to have these types of relationships. So there's a lot of people, I would say, that have the experience of wanting to be in a romantic relationship, but for many reasons might not be able to do that. I don't think that the term incel really properly fits those people anymore. I think it's more been appropriated by this online ideology that's more tied to heterosexual men and their kind of anger and aggression.
Well, last time we talked about the psychology of incels, how self-loathing can often be exacerbated by a group, especially an online group. So could it be a nature or nurture thing, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the social sciences period, things are generally more complicated than nature and nurture these days. I think for most of our behaviors, it's pretty hard to pin them down on just nature. Most people kind of lean towards the idea that it's a combination of both, or a lot of it about the influence of social context. For incels, they certainly do have a lot of commonalities in terms of their psychology. So there's incels that, you read these discussion boards, these forums, there's a distinct kind of lean towards almost like a body dysmorphia. And body dysmorphia would be a symptom of many mental disorders, like anorexia, for instance. So men who are kind of perceiving their bodies as being flawed or problematic or needing improvement, and they focus on things like the size of their nose, their brow ridges, the ratio of their upper lip to their chin, the diameter of their wrist, and they really get quite obsessive about these the minutia of their body. Likewise, there's quite a bit of depression, suicidal ideation that happens on the discussion boards. People who are, in the incel terminology, it's often referred to as roping or rope maxing or roping yourself. And it's an allusion to committing suicide by hanging. And pretty frequent discussions of that, like the only way out of the inceldom might be through dying by suicide. Members encouraging each other to consider suicide as an option, or after they report struggles, romantic struggles, suggesting that the only way forward for a person, another incel, might be to die by suicide. So definitely, like there is some psychological commonalities in the community in that sense. I think absolutely the community itself plays a role in the type of discourse that the men are having. They exclude women, they exclude trans people, they exclude gay men, they exclude men who have had romantic or sexual relationships. So they ostracize incels that have actually like left the inceldom. They police their language and their communication quite heavily. So if you try to put a kind of optimistic or bright side, try to give someone an uplifting message, you will get a lot of criticism for that it's a cope, that you're just trying to cope with the reality of being an incel. You're taking the easy way out, and you're not fully aware of what the world is really like. Fully black-pilled is what they would say. And there's that can turn into formal policing in the discussion boards as well, so that people who are kind of not on message with other incels can get kicked out of the community. So it is really hard in that environment to provide like a counter narrative or a counter environment. And if you want to give men the message about pursuing improvements to their personality or self-improvement, or even letting them know that being in a relationship shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of their existence, those are the things that can kind of get you kicked out of the community. So the context of the discussion has a lot to do with it. In the social science literature, one of the ways that this is discussed is the affordances that a online community provides, the types of things that it permits users to do or not do. And in this case, a lot of the ways that the incel community is set up is to really perpetuate the most negative and kind of self-effacing and angry and toxic elements of the community, and anything that might kind of lead the guys out of those conversations or out of that direction is really heavily policed or even eliminated from discussion.
There's definitely a cult-like vibe to it. I mean, obviously I deal with cults all the time on this channel, but with the terminology and policing and snitching and all that.
Yeah, I've had discussions actually with students who find it to be very similar to cults. I think the big difference between incels and cults is that there's no clear leader or figure in incels. So even people like Elliot Rodger or Alec Manassian are not like a leader of incels. So they're kind of diffuse, loosely organized, and there's not some like one person really formally setting the agenda. But they do orient to an ideology, and they can be quite prescriptive about that ideology. There is debate in incel communities. They're a lot more heterogeneous than I think people appreciate. There's incels who are against misogyny, incels who are against violence, even in the discussion boards that we look at that have a lot of violence and misogyny on them. But by and large, those people get drowned out of the conversation. They get shouted down or they get banned. So there definitely are similarities in terms of like when you're thinking about the kind of monoculture or the similarity of thought.
Mike, is the incel phenomenon a fairly new phenomenon, or has it been around forever? I can't help but think of Jack the Ripper as a possible incel, or is that a bit of a crazy assessment?
I don't think it's a crazy assessment necessarily. I think it's a debatable assessment, and the debate would be we don't really have a firm understanding of who Jack the Ripper was. I think how the community would pick him up would really depend on if they solved that case and who the person ended up to be. If let's say hypothetically the Jack the Ripper case was solved and they did have it pinned on somebody, and that person appeared to be somebody who was celibate their entire life, I don't think that would expect that incels would take that person up and celebrate them as an incel, because they celebrate other people who commit acts of violence against women. So one of the probably clearest cases of this is someone named Mark Halpin, who in Canada committed what for a long period of time was our biggest mass murder. He was in a university. He was very angry at women and feminists. He went into the university and killed exclusively women in the university and left a note saying that he was, targeting and angry at feminists. We've seen comments on incel discussion boards comparing Mark Halpin to other incel mass murderers, so people like Elliot Rodger and people like Alec Manassian. And he's, in many ways, he's more celebrated than those other two, because they see him as targeting and killing the right people, and the right people being women. So Elliot Rodger killed some people who incels feel were also incels, and that was unjust.
Yeah,
and
his roommates, didn't he? Which just seemed to be off the radar, you would think.
Yeah, definitely. There's a surprisingly high amount of sympathy for Elliot Rodger's roommates, and also Elliot Rodger being like a fairly attractive, affluent person. That a lot of people see him as privileged and like a fake incel, and someone who's mostly just a narcissist rather than representative of the community. So, but Mark Halpin, they hold him up in many ways as an example of someone who committed like the right type of mass murder. So if the Jack the Ripper case was solved and the person could be connected to the community in that way, I would not be surprised at all if they kind of started claiming him as a member of the community. In terms of the history of the community itself, it's incel, and the term incel is more recent. It's a phenomenon that's only been online. It started on a blog and discussion board of a woman in Canada, as I mentioned earlier. So that was like the birth of the term and birth of the social category, we might say in sociology. And it's evolved from there, going from her blog to places like 4chan and Reddit to the discussion boards that we look at now. The incels themselves see a longer history of the identity than we in social science do. And they look back on people like even George Orwell, when he was writing Down and Out in Paris and London, talking about the involuntary celibacy, or more or less the same idea of men who were living like unhoused. So they hold up those as examples, and they point to like a long history of the concept. So that would also make them more likely, I think, to claim someone like Jack the Ripper or any other historical serial killer if it can be connected to the community. But by and large, in terms of how we talk about it in academia, is a more recent, very much internet-based phenomenon. And even the kind of contemporary view of incels that we have now, and the way that we think about them and talk about them, is even more recent than that. It's something that you could maybe look at Elliot Rodger's mass killing is kind of like the turning point in how that community was viewed the way that it is now.
Yeah, so the internet seems to make it worse. I suppose if you could see a chart, as internet usage went up, I suppose incel crime went up, or the incel community sort of grew.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many ways that I think the internet is kind of crucial here. One is that many of these men are kind of socially isolated and ostracized. And so without the internet, they wouldn't have a means of connecting with other people, of other men, and sharing their experiences. So people who in the 1980s might be somewhat isolated, like a solitary person in their community, through the internet are able to network and connect with many people. Of course, the internet provides a lot of benefits to other people who are isolated, but in this case, it does have a downside. The other thing is that the way that they have their discussions and their conversations is also kind of facilitating or building the community. So they're able to have these discussions that are removed from other communities, other populations, especially when places like Reddit have banned incels. They don't have other people interacting with them anymore. And they make the rules of the game for their conversation. So they're able to kick people out. They're able to say what you can and cannot say. You can't brag about having a date. You can't brag about any previous or current romantic success. So the internet is really facilitating
Yeah.
the types of discussions that they have in the community. And then in terms of the content that they share, they really deliberately share content that they mark themselves as like rage fuel or suicide fuel, things that are supposed to make other men, other incels, angry
Mm.
or depressed or upset at women or upset at society. So like a man getting embarrassed by like a YouTube video of a man getting embarrassed by a woman in public, they'll deliberately share that and they'll use that as a means to make each other upset and angry about women. So the internet is really much it's tightly coupled. I would say you can't even really separate the modern incel phenomenon from the type of communication that we have over the internet.
One question that's been suggested to me by quite a few viewers of our last interview is, are there female incels?
Yeah, that's a great question. One that has a fairly complex answer in many ways. So, and it would also, I think, depend on which academic you happen to ask. So, in the short answer, yes and no. So, the community, the term was coined by a woman. Are there women who feel themselves to be involuntarily celibate, like want to have a romantic or sexual relationship and unable to do so, have that experience? Absolutely, there certainly are.
Hmm.
And people watching this probably know them. There might be people who are watching this who have that experience. I know people like that in my life, for instance. So, are there women that have this experience of wanting to be in a relationship and not being able to for one reason or another? Absolutely. So, absolutely, that's the case. Are there female incels in the way that we talk about the inceldom now? I think it is a different um, kind of discussion point, because the community is very much dominated by heterosexual men
Hmm.
and their views on relationship life, romantic life, and they explicitly in many of these communities uh, kick women out. So women are not allowed to join. They're not allowed to be part of the inceldom. Many men in these communities think that it's impossible for a woman to be an incel because a woman can always go out and any woman on the planet can go out and anywhere in the world and have casual sex with a man if she feels like it, regardless of how she looks, what her background is, etc. That's their argument, that there's no such thing as a woman who's an incel because a woman can always have a sexual relationship whenever she wants. And that feeds into a bunch of other stuff that they believe about women being the people who kind of hold the reins in terms of sex in society. There's some conversations in some of the communities that a very small number of women are able to qualify, and these are women who usually have like like a genetic condition or some other issue that's connected to their incel status or their claimed incel status. And so there's like really a handful of women on the board that we've analyzed that don't get to participate, but are acknowledged as like they would be seen as legitimate incels. So even in that community, even when they're making an active push to kick women out, there's still exceptions to that rule. The more kind of novel or newer issue here is conversations on incel discussion boards and other places on the internet like 4chan and Reddit about femcells or mcells. So femcells would be female mcells and mcells would be emotional celibates. The idea here is that women might experience something a little bit different than men in terms of this idea of involuntary celibacy. So instead of being interested in a romantic or sexual relationship and not being able to pursue or not being able to obtain one, the idea here is that women are able to have sexual relationships. Again, the idea whenever they want, they can have sexual relationships. Obviously, many people know that that's not the case. But what they might have a difficulty having is a meaningful emotional connection with someone. So that's where the emotional celibate or incel comes from. They might be able to have sex with men or casual sex with men, but they can't find men that are interested in pursuing like a long-term monogamous relationship with them. And there's discussions on this about Reddit communities like female dating strategy. A lot of those women participating in that subreddit get labeled as mcells or femcells. And there's on places like 4chan, there's a lot of kind of misogynistic jokes and mockery directed to women who are on dating apps like Bumble, who were usually in older demographics, so like 35 to 45, living in major metropolitan areas like New York City, have advanced degrees, and are pursuing marriage and having children. And so men will download the dating profiles of these women, compile them together in like a very large JPEG, and kind of share them jokingly, mocking that all these women who are around 40 like still think that they're able to settle down and have kids, and mock these women for putting their career above their family life, and then also mock them, saying that they as incels and people on 4chan say, rode the cock carousel and focused on having plenty of sexual partners. And by the time they got older, no man wanted to have a monogamous relationship with them. So it's the way that they talk about it is highly misogynistic, and it's meant to like shame women and humiliate women, particularly professional women who were well accomplished in other aspects of life, women who were in their 30s to early 40s. And they do discuss those women being femcells or mcells, but not in a way that makes them members of the community or express any sort of sympathy or empathy towards them, only in ways that participate in like the larger conversations that they're having about denigrating women and wanting to remove their rights, and complaining about things about women in the labor force and divorce laws and things like that. So in wrapping that all up, are there women who have the experience similar to these men? Yes. Do they acknowledge that women have these experiences? No. And when they do, they often draw the comparison not to make bonds with women, but to further humiliate or insult them.
So if an incel finally does get what he's after, a sexual encounter or even a permanent girlfriend, what happens then? Is he rehabilitated?
Yeah, I mean, I would not expect them to be rehabilitated. Probably anybody who's expressing that level of persistent misogyny, even if they're in a relationship with a woman, is still going to be very misogynistic. So they might see the absence of their romantic or sexual partner as the cause for their misogyny, and I would expect that is not the case. The other thing is that there's many men who are not incels, who are in heterosexual relationships all the time, who are also extremely misogynistic, have denigrating thoughts and attitudes towards women, treat women poorly. So the fact that these men might enter relationships, I think, is definitely not a cure-all for the thoughts or actions that they're taking. That said, they do discuss this, and it does happen. So it might seem very surprising. You log on to a incel discussion board, you see all these really terrible things said about women, calling women foids and roasties and every sort of denigrating term you can think about, writing long, like hundreds and hundreds of words, essays about hating women, copy pasting the term "I hate women" like 40 times in a comment. You'd probably be surprised, but it does happen that some of these men do establish romantic contact or romantic relationship. So incels refer to this as ascending, and so it's you've kind of ascended away from incel status. You've achieved romantic or sexual. It doesn't even have to be a relationship. It can just be contact, and you're no longer an incel anymore. And one of the things that's interesting is that they count a lot of stuff as ascension, basically. So if you went on like one date with a woman, that might be enough to consider you ascended. If you held hands with a woman, if you had like one kiss, that's enough for many people to see you as ascended. What happens when you ascend in the incel community is that you're banned or you're expected to leave. So if you ascend, the kind of etiquette is that you just stop posting, you stop being a member of the community, you just walk away, and you leave the other incels on their own. If you don't do that, if you talk about the fact that, if you got on there and you talk to some of your friends who you've been talking to for, years maybe, right? And you said, good news, like finally, things have changed in my life. I went on a date. It went really well. We have a second date planned. Like, I want to tell you guys all about it. Like, here's how it worked for me. You would be banned from the community. And the reason that they ban men from who've ascended from participating is it's seen as basically as bragging, so that you're holding it over all the other people who are incels. So the rest of you cannot have a romantic partner. The rest of you cannot have sexual relationships, but I was able to do it, and now I'm better than all of you. And so they kick them out of the community for that reason.
Again, it's making an assumption, isn't it? I mean, because they call it ascending, which sounds quite positive, but
Yes.
if they actually speak about it, they're banned.
Yeah, they're banned, and because the idea is that it's you're making the other community members feel bad.
Yeah.
So the underlying idea is that if you're an incel, you're an incel for life. So the part of their black pill ideology that we talked about before is that it's very fatalistic. So if you meet the criteria to be an incel, it's over for you forever. You're forever alone, just as the Reddit community was called, forever alone. There's no hope. There's no chance. There's no point in working on your personality. There's no point in working out, making yourself more attractive. There's no point in focusing on other things and hoping like a relationship will come along. There's no point in watching YouTube videos on how to approach women, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff is pointless because it's already been decided for you. It's over. You're an incel. Things are based on looks and appearance, and by lookism, you're going to be eliminated forever, so don't even try. So the idea here is that the people who manage to ascend, even though exactly what you're saying is like they're ascending out of the incel status, they make it sound like a transition, right? That you went from an incel to something up above. But the idea here for many of them is that those people who ascended, they were never real incels in the first place. So the fact that they were able to get a date means that they were never actually in that incel category, because people who are real incels don't have any hope of ascending at all. So it's kind of like a convoluted logic that maintains the illusion that all the people who are in the community, that they're in there forever, and they're in there forever because of nothing to do with themselves, nothing that they can change. It's not their fault. It's just the world that's put this status upon them.
And again, talking about the word ascending, the opposite of that is descending, which perhaps they think that they have done, descended in some cases literally into the basement. And it seems to me, well, that's the world they want to be in, almost as if they've joined a political party or have decided, I'm a flat earther, or I'm a creationist, or I'm this, or I'm that. And it's like, if you leave, it's like it's an insult to the group.
Yeah, it's an insult to the group, and it really directly threatens the logic of the group, because the group is based on this idea of fatalism. And if people are able to leave the group, it challenges these fatalistic ideas. And I totally agree with your attention to the term ascension. I think that's one of the areas where it definitely skews towards cult-like language. It's hard to be, I'm not a very religious person, but it's hard not to see kind of religious connotations to this idea of ascension. And I think it's the way that they're also marking these men who leave the community as somehow like special or angelic or otherworldly, that they're able to leave. And definitely, exactly as you mentioned, you think about what that means conversely, and what they're saying is that they are descended, they are fallen, and it goes right in line with the stuff that I was saying earlier about their sense of kind of self-esteem and self-worth, is that they really do think, as much as they hate women, and they hate women very passionately, they're also very much involved in self-hatred, and they do see themselves as social refuse, genetic trash, human garbage, and very much reasons why they connect the community to death by suicide.
So what does the future of this community look like? Will this kind of psychology become a recognized condition, for instance? And also, what can people do if we see this kind of behavior?
Yeah, I would not really be surprised if psychiatry did get involved with incels for many reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier in the chat, There is a lot of body dysmorphia in the community, a lot of what a psychiatrist would call cognitive distortions, that they're not seeing themselves or their world accurately. Other people might see their body one way and they see their body a completely different way. That is a component of several mental disorders that are in the DSM, the big book of mental disorders that psychiatrists use. So that would make them very relevant for psychiatrists. And as we've also talked about, they are really characterized by a lot of depression and thoughts and interest in self-harm. And of course, this component of several psychiatric conditions as well. People who are acutely suicidal or contemplating suicide are often referred to psychiatrists or psychologists. So the potential connections between the two groups makes a lot of sense. There's incels make a lot of antisocial comments and claims, and have a lot of antisocial actions and celebrate antisocial actions. That's also something that's covered by many psychiatric disorders. So I think that many of these men, if they're not interacting with psychiatrists or psychologists, they might be in the future. I think that mental health professionals are going to be paying more and more attention to the community as time goes on. I think it is basically inevitable. In the sociology literature, we talk about this kind of phenomenon as medicalization, when something becomes like the kind of focus or topic of medicine. And I think it's very, very likely that incels get medicalized in one way, shape, or form. It would not be out of the realm of possibility in like a decade, I think, for a specific diagnostic category to be reflective of this experience. And there's other cultures and societies where there are men who are experiencing things similar, like in Japan, young men who basically go into their bedrooms and do not leave for years at a time. So their parents don't see them, nobody sees them, they just stay in their bedroom, stay on the internet. Those similar types of experiences that get read as being more like mental disorders. So I think it is very, very likely that psychiatry will become more heavily involved in the inceldom, and I wouldn't bet against it, to be brief. I think the other thing that we'll see, and we're seeing it in different degrees in different countries, that they will be increasingly criminalized. So currently, they've been having conversations on the internet, and in many ways, we're being left alone. And I think that changed a bit after Elliot Rodger, that people started paying attention to them after Elliot Rodger, and it really changed after Alec Minassian. After Alec Minassian committed a mass murder in Toronto, that changed the way that Canada was looking at incels, and they've started the process of considering them as a domestic terror organization or a domestic terror ideology. So really explicitly connecting it to terrorism. In the UK and in the United States, there's more debate about whether the group would be a terrorist ideology or not, and there's a lot of pushback about that. There's a lot of implications of how might impact civil liberties, especially on their internet. There's lots of debates in all these countries about what should or should not be done on the internet. The United States just appointed like a disinformation czar, for instance. I believe it was last week. It's going to be very relevant to these types of communities. And there's a lot of laws in these countries that are relevant to the acts and the communications of incels already. So things like hate crime laws in particular. So they're talking about their hatred of women, and then many of them end up going out and assaulting women or harassing women or cyber stalking women, and they're encouraging other men to do this as well. So whether or not they end up getting seen as a terrorist group, you could make the argument, I would expect that legal authorities would be amenable to making this argument, that they're a community that's kind of participating or facilitating the commission of hate crimes against women. So I think those are the two things that I think are, the more connection with mental health professionals, and the increasing likelihood that they get viewed as a community that's engaged in criminal acts, whether it's terrorism or hate crimes or something different. I think it is probably inevitable that that's going to happen because of the discourse that's on these on these sites that there's a lot of talk about violence, about women, even the stuff that doesn't make the news, the cyber stalking, the harassment. Many women on the internet, if you talk to them, have had experiences of being harassed by these type of people. They send me hostile emails after I talk about them. So I think it's really only a matter of time before that happens, and it's unfortunately, I think, only a matter of time before another large attack happens, because we really haven't done anything to change the reality about that at all. So those are the things. In terms of recognizing someone like this in your personal life, I think it's very difficult, and it's difficult because these men, A, they're isolated, and B, they know that they're stigmatized and they're ostracized. So they know that if they mention that they're an incel, that people are not going to react to them positively. They know that if they share some of their beliefs about women or lookism or whatever, that people are going to react to them, like cancel them, socially ostracize them, out them, respond to them with hatred and vitriol, as I expect many people probably would, actually. So I think it's difficult to note who these people are in your personal life, because they make an effort, as they say in some of these spaces, of hiding their power level. So they might play along and say some things that disguise the fact that they're incels, or that they're interested in the incel ideology. I think probably the biggest tell of whether someone is an incel or not is their attitude towards lookism. So lookism is like one of the real central tenets of the incel community. This idea that we're judged primarily by our physical appearance. People who are attractive get all the glory. People who are unattractive get neglected. They get cheated on, or they end up being incels. So people who are talking about physical appearance or looks being a really determining factor might be an indication that they're consuming incel content. Similarly, men who have opinions about women being obsessed or fixated on finding the best male partner and being in general unfaithful and always looking for the most attractive man. So not the most successful man necessarily in terms of like a businessman or whatever, but the most attractive man. That women just do that, and they do it very blindly. And then any of the terms that are kind of very specific to the incel community, or more specific to the incel community, things like roasty or foid, is usually like a tell that people are involved in these communities. And I would say that those would be the big ones. The other thing is, pay attention if you're concerned that someone is in this community. I would say pay attention to the type of online media that they're consuming. Like, are they going to an incel discussion board? Do they visit 4chan frequently, because there's an incel discussion board on 4chan? Are they consuming the YouTube videos that are made by incels and for incels? And then if you run into somebody like this, I think, it's very difficult to think about what we could or could not do for these people. I've had conversations with the people who email me, and I find them very stuck in their ways. I think they think they can change my mind, and I think I can change their mind, and I think we're both disappointed when the conversation ends. But I think, the thing that really needs to be driven home is that the way that they talk about women is absolutely unacceptable. So you can have sympathy for people in this experience. Obviously, it's very tough to be alone. Obviously, it's tough to feel unloved. It's tough to feel ugly. It's tough to feel like you might want to harm yourself. All that stuff is true, and I have sympathy for people who have those feelings. But none of that stuff justifies how they talk about women, how they think about women, and the actions that they take towards women. And there's many men who have romantic difficulties, or who are celibate and not wanting to be celibate, who don't turn to or engage in misogyny. So I think, just as a non-starter, I think after that, talking to people, just really directly about trying to detach sex and romance from their self-worth is one of the things that's kind of come out for me doing this project over the last couple of years, is that by and large, all these guys are just defining themselves about this one part of their life, that they're not in a romantic or sexual relationship, and because they can't do that one thing, they see themselves as a complete failure. And I think just challenging that idea that we would, in the same way that they reduce women to sexual objects, they're also reducing themselves to men who participate in sex. They reduce them to a sexual status. And I think challenging that would be very helpful. They make a lot of effort in the community to say that working on your personality doesn't matter, or working on yourself doesn't matter. And I think pushing back against those types of arguments, because personality definitely does matter, and I think they're underestimating how much it does. But nonetheless, you're never gonna be worse off doing self-improvement. So if you were single and you weren't exercising and you felt like garbage and you were eating like junk and you weren't pursuing any of the things that made you happy, and then you did all that stuff, you did all that self-improvement, and you were still single, well, at least you have the benefits of the self-improvement after. You feel better about yourself. So it's not going to be a waste of time. So I think encouraging that type of thing. I would also say encouraging them to get out of the echo chamber or the monoculture of the incel community, and even pointing out to them, right, that they don't let women in here, they don't let men who have ascended in here, they don't let a whole bunch of people with different experiences in here. All you're hearing is the opinions from the same type of people. Go out and listen to opinions of other people, listen to people who maybe have had struggles similar to yours, and see if you can learn from those people. But even if you're going to still be in this community, be really attentive to the fact that it is really a monoculture, and it's carefully crafted to be a monoculture. And then I would say the last thing that we could think about, and this has helped in some other communities that have had similar histories of antisocial acts or actions or whatever, but having people who were former members of this community interact and kind of appeal to the current members. And I think someone who's a former incel, it'd be awesome if someone volunteered to talk on your show, actually. Someone who's a former incel could make a way more compelling argument to these men than like I ever could. I'm married, I have a kid, like they don't see me as having the same experiences. I'm just some normie who's giving them the usual blue pill stuff that they've heard a million times. But I think people who have had the same experiences as them, but have left that community and seen the negative impact that community has had on themselves, I think those people have a lot of potential to reach them, and a lot of potential to say things that might get across them a lot better than me or some other people might.
Absolutely. I mean, this show is mainly about talking to people who have left a cult or a bad belief system and speaking out about it and essentially warning people about it. So yes, if there are any ex-incels, please get in touch.
Yeah, and I think they'd be doing like a great service by chatting with you about it.
Well, it's been great to have you back on the show, Mike. I always learn so much when I talk to you, and no doubt this will generate even more conversation and feedback than our previous chat. As before, I will leave links to your site and research papers in the description below. And all that's left to say is thank you very much indeed, Mike, for coming back on To Talk Beliefs.
No problem. I hope it spurs a constructive conversation amongst your viewers, and I look forward to hearing the feedback.